When Jake stumbles across a damning text on his wife Emily's phone, his world shatters. The woman he trusted has been leading a double life, entangled in a forbidden affair with a charismatic coworker. As Jake unravels the web of lies, he discovers the depths of her betrayal, and a far darker manipulation at play. Fueled by heartbreak and rage, Jake sets out to reclaim his life, only to uncover a shocking twist that changes everything. In this gripping tale of deception, revenge, and redemption, love and betrayal collide, leaving no one unscathed. How far would you go to expose the truth? It was a crisp, bright morning, the kind that usually filled me with energy and optimism. I was in the kitchen, prepping breakfast for my kids while Emily hummed a tune from the shower upstairs. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and the sound of laughter drifted in from the living room where the kids were watching cartoons. Life seemed good, steady, until her phone buzzed on the counter, derailing my entire reality. At first, I ignored it. It wasn't unusual for Emily's phone to light up with notifications. Between work, friends, and family, she was constantly in touch with someone. But the message stayed on the lock screen long enough to catch my attention. I glanced over, only half interested, but the words grabbed me like a vice. "I can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. Your husband won't suspect a thing." My hand froze mid-reach for the coffee mug. My pulse quickened. Rationality fought to take control. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was a joke. A misinterpretation. But deep down, I already knew. Emily's voice called down from the stairs, breaking my trance. "Jake, did you pack the kids' lunches yet?" "Almost," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. I shoved the phone into my pocket, still glowing with the damning message. My hands moved mechanically as I finished the sandwiches and zipped up their lunchboxes. Emily came downstairs a moment later, her damp hair tied back, looking every bit the devoted wife and mother. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, her familiar perfume brushing my senses, but all I could think about was the message burning a hole in my pocket. The rest of the morning blurred by. I dropped the kids off at school and headed to work, my mind churning with questions. Who was this "beautiful" to the person texting? Who was the sender? How long had this been going on? I couldn't focus on work that day. My team noticed my distraction, but I brushed off their questions with vague excuses. During lunch, I finally mustered the courage to unlock Emily's phone. I knew her password, it wasn't even a secret. She'd often asked me to respond to texts or make calls for her. The message thread was still open. My heart pounded as I scrolled. The sender's name was Adam, a name I vaguely recognized from Emily's stories about work. He was a coworker, someone she had described as friendly. But the messages between them told a very different story. Their conversation stretched back months. It was littered with flirtatious banter, shared jokes, and plans for secret meetups. Some of the texts were explicit, others were tender, almost romantic. They painted a picture of a relationship that wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All the little oddities I'd ignored over the past year began to surface. The extra effort Emily had been putting into her appearance, the late nights at work, the unexplained trips, everything clicked into place. My wife was cheating on me. The rage was immediate, white-hot, and suffocating. I wanted to confront her that instant, to throw her phone in her face and demand answers. But a quieter voice in my mind urged caution. If I exploded now, I might never get the full truth. Emily could deny everything, twist the narrative, or worse, turn our kids against me. No, I needed a plan. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed. Emily seemed relaxed, even cheerful, as we had dinner with the kids. I forced myself to smile and nod at her stories about work, but every laugh felt hollow. My mind was already working, plotting how to expose her betrayal without letting her gain the upper hand. After the kids went to bed, Emily curled up on the couch with her favorite book. I watched her from across the room, the same woman I had promised to love and cherish forever. How had we gotten here? I wanted to hate her, but a part of me still loved her. That made it hurt even more. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own marriage. I checked her phone whenever I could, copied her texts and emails, and even logged into her social media accounts. The more I dug, the worse it got. Hotel receipts from weekends when she was on business trips. Credit card charges for dinners at high-end restaurants. Photos of her and Adam, smiling together like a couple in love. But the most damning discovery was the texts to our kids. She had coached them on what to say if I asked about her whereabouts. My blood boiled as I read them. She had dragged our innocent children into her deceit, using them as shields for her lies. That was the moment I decided there would be no reconciliation. Emily had crossed a line I could never forgive. The day I finalized my plan was surreal. It was a Friday, a day like any other. I kissed my kids goodbye before school, knowing that by the end of the weekend, everything would be different. Emily didn't suspect a thing as she kissed me on her way out the door, a sly smile on her lips that I now recognized as guilt. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss the evidence I had collected. The photos, the messages, the receipts, it was airtight. My lawyer assured me that I had a strong case for full custody of the kids and the house. I had already frozen our joint accounts, ensuring Emily couldn't drain them when the truth came out. When I returned home that evening, Emily was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, a familiar comfort that now felt tainted. I sat down at the table, watching her as she chopped vegetables. She looked up and smiled, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I didn't confront her then. I waited, biding my time, letting her think she had gotten away with it. But inside, I was counting down the hours until the facade crumbled. The weekend loomed like a storm cloud, but I played my part perfectly. By Saturday morning, I was the same devoted husband and father Emily had always known, or so she thought. She had no idea that every glance, every smile I gave her, was an act. Beneath the surface, I was simmering with the knowledge of her betrayal and the certainty that her charade was coming to an end. Emily left the house early that morning, claiming she had errands to run before meeting a friend for brunch. I watched her walk out the door, her heels clicking confidently on the driveway, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if she had always been this good at lying. The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it aside. Today wasn't about feelings, it was about execution. Once she was gone, I set the plan into motion. I had already arranged for the kids to spend the weekend at my sister's house, framing it as a fun sleepover with their cousins. They were thrilled, blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath their parents' smiles. I packed their bags, dropped them off, and promised I'd pick them up on Sunday evening. With the house empty, I sat in the living room and reviewed everything I had collected. My laptop was open, displaying a folder labeled Evidence. Inside were the screenshots of Emily's texts, photos of her and Adam, and a detailed timeline of her lies. It was an unassailable case, one that painted a clear picture of her infidelity and disregard for our family. The sound of Emily's car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. She entered the house carrying a shopping bag and a coffee cup, her expression carefree. "Hey," she greeted me. "How was the morning with the kids?" "Great," I replied, keeping my tone light. "They're at my sister's now. Thought we could have a quiet evening." Her eyes brightened. "That sounds perfect. I could use a break." Perfect indeed. The evening passed uneventfully. We ate dinner together, exchanged small talk, and even laughed at one of her stories about work. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, smiling and nodding while knowing everything she had done. I wondered if this was how she had felt during all those dinners when she had just come back from Adam's arms. After dinner, Emily suggested we watch a movie. I agreed, but my mind wasn't on the screen. It was on the confrontation I had been planning for weeks. I waited until the credits rolled and the house fell silent. Emily stretched, her body relaxed, and reached for the remote. "Emily," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. She looked at me, puzzled. "Yeah. We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "What about?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and locked eyes with her. "About Adam." Her reaction was immediate, her face went pale, and her body stiffened. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence. Without saying a word, I slid it across the coffee table toward her. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the device, before picking it up. Her eyes darted across the screen as she scrolled through the photos and screenshots. The color drained from her face with every passing second. "Jake," she began, but her voice cracked. "I can explain." "Don't bother," I said sharply. "The photos, the messages, the hotel receipts, they explain everything." She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Don't insult me, Emily," I interrupted. "It's exactly what I think. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. You've been sneaking around with him for months, maybe years. And you used our kids to cover for you. How could you?" The tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed. I laughed bitterly. "You didn't want to hurt me? Then what the hell was this? A game? A midlife crisis?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I was lonely, Jake. You've been so busy with work, with the kids, there was no time for us anymore. Adam made me feel wanted." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped. "I've been working hard for this family, for you. While you were sneaking around, I was here, holding everything together." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this." I stood, towering over her as she crumbled on the couch. "No, Emily. You made a choice to destroy everything we built. This isn't something we can fix." Her sobs filled the room as I walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, the cold liquid doing little to quell the fire inside me. When I returned, Emily was still crying, clutching her knees to her chest like a child. I felt a flicker of pity but quickly snuffed it out. She didn't deserve my sympathy. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said flatly. "You'll be hearing from them next week. I want full custody of the kids, and I'm keeping the house." Her head shot up, panic replacing the tears. "Jake, no. Please, don't do this. Don't take my children away from me." "You took them away from yourself the moment you dragged them into your lies," I said coldly. "You don't get to play the victim now." She lunged for me, clutching my arm. "Please, Jake. I'll do anything. Just let me stay. Let me make this right." I shook her off and stepped back. "It's too late, Emily. You made your choice. Now you'll live with the consequences." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a moment, feeling the weight of what I had just done. There was no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, only a hollow ache where my trust had once been. I left the room without another word, shutting the door behind me. Upstairs, I stared at the ceiling, knowing this was only the beginning of the storm. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of relief. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I woke up early, the weight of the previous night's confrontation still pressing heavily on my chest. Emily's sobs from the living room had ceased sometime in the night, but the memory of them lingered like a ghost. I walked downstairs and found her curled up on the couch, wrapped in the throw blanket we usually reserved for movie nights with the kids. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of despair and hope. "Jake," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, we can still fix this." I ignored her plea, moving to the kitchen to start the coffee maker. The quiet hum of the machine was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling in my mind. I poured myself a cup, took a long sip, and finally turned to face her. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This isn't something that can be fixed with an apology or a promise to do better. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." She sat up, clutching the blanket like it was a lifeline. "I'll go to therapy." "We can go to therapy. Anything you want, I'll do it. Just please, don't end us." "There is no us," I replied coldly. "You ended that the moment you decided Adam was worth more than your marriage, your family." Her face crumpled, and fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. But I had no sympathy left to offer. My focus was on the future, on my kids, on rebuilding my life without her deceit tainting it. "I'm leaving for a while," I said, setting my mug down on the counter. "I need some space to think." Emily looked panicked. "Where are you going? Are you taking the kids?" "They're at my sister's, remember? And no, I'm not taking them now. I'll pick them up tomorrow evening as planned. For now, I need to clear my head." She stood up, the blanket falling away, revealing the wrinkled clothes she had slept in. "Jake, please don't go. We can talk this out." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, grabbing my keys. "I've made my decision." Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door and into the crisp morning air. The cold bit at my skin, but I welcomed it. It was a sharp, grounding contrast to the numbness I felt inside. I drove aimlessly for hours, the radio off, the silence in the car a reflection of the chaos in my mind. My thoughts jumped between anger and sadness, betrayal and resolve. I replayed Emily's pleas, her excuses, her sobs, but nothing softened my stance. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. Eventually, I found myself at a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place we used to visit before life got so complicated, back when we were just a young couple in love, with no kids, no mortgages, no betrayals. The nostalgia stung, but I pushed it aside and ordered a coffee, hoping the caffeine would clear my head. As I sipped my drink, I thought about the kids. They were too young to understand what was happening, and I dreaded the day I'd have to explain why their mother wasn't living with us anymore. But they deserved honesty, even if it was painful. I vowed to protect them from the worst of it, to shield them from the fallout as much as I could. After a few hours of solitude, I felt ready to return home. I didn't want to face Emily again, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. The house was still technically hers too, at least for now. When I walked through the door, the house was dark and silent. For a moment, I thought Emily might have left, but then I heard the faint sound of movement upstairs. I debated whether to confront her again or retreat to my office, but my decision was made for me when she appeared at the top of the stairs. "Jake," she said softly. I packed a bag. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while." I was surprised but relieved. "That's probably for the best." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I want you to know. I'm sorry. I know you don't believe me, but I am." "I believe you're sorry now," I said. "But that doesn't change what you did." She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she descended the stairs, grabbed her suitcase from the hallway, and walked past me without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the house eerily empty. I sat down on the couch, the same spot where she had begged for forgiveness just hours ago. The silence was deafening, but it was also liberating. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The next day, I picked up the kids from my sister's house. They were full of stories about their sleepover, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their parents' lives. I plastered on a smile and laughed at their tales, grateful for their innocence. When we got home, they immediately ran to the playroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, taking in the silence, the emptiness. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would have to navigate single parenthood and the scars of betrayal. But as I looked around the house, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. Emily had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The weeks following Emily's departure were a blur of adjustments and quiet resilience. The kids settled into a new routine quickly, perhaps too quickly, I thought at times, as though they had sensed the tension long before the storm finally hit. I poured my energy into work and parenting, determined to give them a stable, loving environment. I was still processing my emotions, but life had a strange way of carrying on. Emily reached out sparingly, her calls polite and brief, focused only on arranging visits with the kids. Each conversation left me with a hollow ache. She sounded like a stranger, her warmth replaced by a distant cordiality. It was as though she had resigned herself to the role of an outsider in our lives. I thought I was fine with that, until the unexpected happened. It was a Friday evening, a month after she moved out. The kids were playing in the living room, their laughter filling the house, while I stood in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced at the screen. It was an email notification from an unfamiliar address. Curious, I wiped my hands and opened it. The subject line read, "You need to know the truth." The message was concise but devastating. "Jake, you don't know me, but I'm Adam's wife. I think it's time you know that Emily wasn't the only one lying. Attached is a file you might want to see." My heart raced as I downloaded the attachment. It was a PDF containing screenshots of text messages, photos, and emails between Adam and Emily, but also between Adam and several other women. The timeline overlapped with Emily's affair, revealing that Adam had been stringing her along while maintaining other relationships. Worse, some of the texts to Emily showed that he had actively encouraged her to manipulate me, using phrases like, "He won't suspect a thing," and, "Just make him feel guilty if he gets suspicious." The messages painted a picture not of love or even lust but of cold calculation. Adam had played Emily like a puppet, feeding her insecurities while inflating her ego, all to serve his own twisted sense of power. My first reaction was fury, not at Emily this time, but at Adam. He had not only destroyed my marriage but also preyed on Emily's vulnerabilities to do so. The betrayal felt layered, intricate, and far more insidious than I had imagined. I sat down at the table, staring at the screen as the implications sank in. Emily had wronged me, no doubt about that, but she had also been manipulated, used, and discarded. The woman I had confronted a month ago wasn't the villain I thought she was a victim in her own way. That night, I couldn't sleep. The knowledge of Adam's deceit churned in my mind, mingling with a strange sense of pity for Emily. I didn't forgive her, that wasn't something I could do so easily, but I felt compelled to tell her what I had learned. She deserved to know the truth, even if it wouldn't change the outcome. The next morning, I called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hesitant. "Jake. We need to talk," I said. Her pause was telling. "About what?" "It's not about us," I said. "It's about Adam. Can you meet me at the park near the house? I'll bring the kids so they can play." "Okay," she said after a long silence. "I'll be there in an hour." The park was alive with the sound of children laughing and parents chatting, a stark contrast to the tension simmering between us as we sat on a bench. The kids were on the swings, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. I handed Emily my phone, showing her the email and the attachment. Her face went pale as she read the messages, her hands trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. I thought he cared about me. He didn't, I said bluntly. He cared about control. He played you, Emily. Just like he played me, just like he played everyone. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time since the confrontation, I saw genuine remorse. I was so stupid, she said, her voice cracking. I threw away everything for him. For this. I wanted to lash out, to remind her that she had still made her choices, but the fight had drained out of me. Instead, I said, what's done is done. But now you know the truth. What you do with it is up to you. She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Thank you for telling me. We sat in silence for a while, watching the kids play. There was a strange peace in the air, a fragile truce born of shared understanding. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same side, even if only for a moment. As the weeks passed, Emily began to rebuild her life. She started therapy and focused on being a better mother to the kids. Our interactions became less strained, and though we were far from friends, there was a newfound respect between us. And Adam? He didn't escape unscathed. His wife filed for divorce, exposing his behavior to his colleagues and effectively ruining his career. The last I heard, he had left town in disgrace. Life slowly returned to normal, or a new version of it. The scars of betrayal didn't fade entirely, but they no longer defined me. I found strength in my children, in my work, and in the knowledge that I had survived the worst. One night, as I tucked the kids into bed, my youngest asked, "Dad, do you still love Mom?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. I'll always care about her because she's your mom. But sometimes, people aren't meant to stay together, even if they love each other in their own way. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.